Typography. Kinda sounds like a word I just made up. So recently I started taking classes for graphic design. As a novice in that field, one of the courses I'm forced to take is one on typography, the study, design, and use of fonts and lettering. During my first few weeks in class, I've learned two major things. One, typography is a massively important aspect of graphic design. I mean, it's the art of being able to use fonts and lettering correctly, to the point where information is communicated so efficiently and effectively that the typography isn't even noticed by the readers. Think about it. When you're reading these captions, you don't think about the form in which the information is being presented, you just read the letters on screen. That's because this text contains good typography. And two, typography is kind of boring. It's an area that demands subtlety and understatedness, and there are many tedious aspects of typography that need to be learned in order to better understand and utilize it. The anatomy of fonts, typefaces, hierarchy, readability versus legibility, as well as the history of typography itself. And although there will always be some who find all of this to be intensely fascinating, most of you probably couldn't care less. Which is why, after watching literal hours worth of videos on this subject, I thought to myself, surely there must be a more entertaining way to learn about typography. So, me being me, I turned to Google. To my surprise, there are actually quite a few games about typography out there. We have such classics as I Shot the Serif. Just exhilarating stuff here. Yeah, most of these games aren't particularly deep or interesting. They're just simple web browser games designed to help you learn various aspects of typography. And while I'm sure someone would have a blast playing Kern Me for hours on end, I want something deeper, something more challenging. A game that'll really teach me what typography is truly all about. And damn it, Font Guesser just isn't going to cut it. Fine, I guess we'll try Typewriter. And guys, I found it. Not just a good game about typography, but a great game overall, a real hidden gem. So much so that I'm pretty confident when I say that this is not only one of the best puzzle platformers I've ever played, but almost certainly one of the coolest platformers you've never heard of. Now, if it's as good as I claim, how come you haven't heard of it? Well, after some research, I think I've discovered three major reasons for this game's obscurity. Reason number one. Huh? Yeah, this isn't just your standard obscure Steam release, it's a mobile game. And if that wasn't enough of a slap in the face for all you self-proclaimed hardcore gamers, it also costs money. This game was released back in 2013, which according to my calculations was right in the middle of the global smartphone boom. It was actually about this time that I got my first iPhone, and it was an era of the App Store that I associate with tons of simple but fun games being released one after the other. And while increasing smartphone sales meant that a game that made it big could stay big for a while, the subsequent increase of software for the platform also made it difficult for most games to gain visibility. And as for nowadays, when most modern mobile games are dog shit, who the hell wants to spend $3.50 for an app to take up space on your Retro Bowl machine? Reason number two. Who? Typewriter was developed by Cosmographic. You know, the French indie developer whose only other game since is another puzzler for mobile devices, except this one costs $5.50 and was released the same year as Pokemon Go. Yeah, that Cosmographic. I wonder why people haven't heard of them. After some light stalking, I managed to find a variety of social media for the guy, including a Twitter account that's still getting used and proclaims that his next game should be ready for release in 2025. I'll have to add that one to my calendar. However, Google claims that the studio itself is temporarily closed, so I'm not really sure what's going on with them at the moment. Also, I found an Etsy storefront under the same name selling wooden Koroks, so now I'm just confused. As for the publisher, Agat Films is another French company who, get this, makes films. Wikipedia incorrectly lists them as the developers, which is weird, but weirder still is the fact that in the company's 37-year history, this is the only video game they've ever worked on. There's also Bulky Pix, a mobile game publisher that was liquidated back in 2016, as well as Art, a European public service channel focusing on art and culture that has published a handful of other games, though Typewriter remains their most well-known. Well, that's not saying much. And reason number three. What? I mean, come on, it's a game about typography. Unless you're a graphic designer, it's probably a field of study you've never even heard of. Still, I find it kind of bizarre how little publicity this game has gotten. It certainly had its chances. It has great reviews, it won an award at an indie showcase, it was even free for PlayStation Plus subscribers back in 2017. For God's sake, it was published by a public service channel. You could literally advertise it on public television. But no, barely 500 reviews on Steam, not even 400 reviews on the App Store, and hardly any coverage on YouTube outside of a couple trailers and the occasional playthrough and or review. Hell, the latest version of the game on the Google Play Store barely has 100 downloads. Whatever relevance this game might have had has clearly long since passed, which is a shame, since quality mobile games are needed now more desperately than ever, and modern indie games, particularly good indie games, seem to receive a lot more publicity today than they would back in 2013. If it was released nowadays, then with the right marketing and publicity, I think it would have a good chance at gaining way more relevance than it ever did. The long-term success of games like Journey, Fez, Shovel Knight, and even more recent projects like Celeste and Hades show that gamers are more than willing to take a chance on indie projects if there's enough positivity surrounding the game. But that doesn't really explain why Vandals bombed, so I guess you can disregard everything I just said. Alright, enough talking about the game. Let's see if we can actually justify spending 14 quarters on this thing. In Typewriter, you control a pair of balls.
Take my money.
The game immediately throws you into the tutorial, which offers you the opportunity to quickly learn your large and incredibly diverse moveset, otherwise known as right, left, and jump. I mean, I guess they gotta keep it simple for mobile games, but playing it on anything else kinda just feels underwhelming. This game renders 97% of your keyboard irrelevant. What's the point of it being a board at that point? Now a key stick, that's what you really need. You do have the additional ability to wall jump, but that's about it. Your moveset is pretty vanilla. Levels primarily consist of platforming and light puzzle solving, with the main challenge coming from the fact that your character consists of two separate but connected entities, cause, you know, balls. This definitely makes platforming a bit trickier. It's difficult to fully control their movement, which is something the game recognizes and in some instances specifically designs platforming and puzzle solving challenges around. It's nice that we get the occasional challenge from the developers, though by and large the game is pretty easy. Most obstacles don't take more than 1 or 2 attempts to bypass, and frequent checkpoints mean this game isn't very punishing either. However, the gameplay isn't really the point with Typewriter. Instead, it's the environments and presentation being emphasized above all else. Typewriter is divided into 8 worlds, each containing 4 levels and depicting a different era of typography and typeface design. Levels are largely made up of the letters of each individual typeface and are themed around the ideas, inventions, and environments they're often associated with. Just the fact that the developers managed to create levels themed around something as simple as fonts is incredibly impressive to me. It really emphasizes this game's unique theme and sense of identity. The levels themselves are wonderfully artistic. They may be silhouettes, but they're paired with some gorgeous dynamic backgrounds, and in my opinion, this pairing serves as the most obvious demonstration of this game's artistry. Each world contains 33 collectibles for you to find, 26 letters, 6 asterisks, and 1 secret ampersand. None of these are particularly difficult to find. I mean, sometimes you have to go a little off the beaten path to find one of the ampersands, but I've found pretty much everything on my first go. Also, the asterisks are the only collectibles that actually do anything. Each one you collect provides a little page of information detailing how typography was advanced in each respective era. I guess it's kind of disappointing that a vast majority of the game's collectibles don't actually do anything, but I honestly don't mind it too much. It gives you a little something to do outside of blasting through each level as quickly as possible, and seeing the full collection of letters allows the font design to be easily appreciated, as opposed to when you're just trying to platform across them. As for the asterisks, maybe it's just because I'm a history buff, but I think having these information sheets on the evolution of typography as a reward for your efforts is pretty cool, and it means by the end of the game you'll have your own little pocket encyclopedia on the history of type. All in all, this game is a true dedication to the history, evolution, and beauty of typography, which in turn is only emphasized by how beautiful this game is in its own right. As for the tutorial itself, it doubles as a lesson on the origins of typography, depicting early forms of written communication such as cave paintings, cuneiform, and hieroglyphics, before moving on to more modern writing systems like Chinese characters, Greek lettering, and finally, the Latin alphabet. It's a brief but solid introduction to some of the most significant advancements in human history, and while we do flash through quite a few millennia in the span of a couple minutes, it does provide a bit of context for how exactly we got from cave art to curls. Some basic platforming later, and a white dot appears, push it over some scales, and the tutorial is over. We arrive in the overworld, and the title makes itself known. It's a pretty basic introduction, but a scenic one at that, and a solid setup for the game as a whole. The first stop on this typographic journey is Gothic, home of scribes, fancy letters, and whatever the hell else monasteries were used for. Immediately, the game dumps you headfirst into an atmosphere unlike any other. Ink blots, creaking wood, and a dark haze penetrated by sunbeams, these details give the environment an air of sanctity that has almost been forgotten in our modern age. This is the environment where typography was truly born. I absolutely adore the finer details here. The lighting effects, the particles, the way the background looks like a sheet of parchment, it all meshes together wonderfully and feels sublime. If the introductory sequence was enough of a sampler of things to come, then this level serves as your wake-up call, and it sets high expectations for this game's presentation. Also, I love the music for this world. It starts slow, a drum beat, Gregorian chanting, then the music slowly swells and other instruments are added in as you progress throughout the levels. Cymbals, strings, church bells, a synthesized organ, and by the end you've built up this crashing, grandiose rhythm. And that reminds me, I kinda neglected to mention it before, but the music in Typewriter is absolutely elite. Alongside the dynamic visuals, this game also offers an adaptive soundtrack, which is when the music swells, fades, and shifts as you progress throughout the stage, which is kind of surprising to see, to be honest. There are AAA titles that don't even bother implementing adaptive music, so to see that level of effort coming from the designers of a 10-year-old game being put out on the same platform as Minion Rush, I'm not complaining, but it's a bit mind-boggling to say the least. Every entry on the soundtrack is at the very least pretty solid, which is impressive considering the sheer variety of musical styles that the soundtrack has on offer. Whether it's Didot's orchestral compositions or the abstract jazz of the Futura levels, the music almost always serves as the perfect final ingredient when tying together the atmosphere of each level. World 2 is Garamond, which shows the creation of what we now know as serif fonts. You know, when fonts have those little, feet at the ends? Yeah. Serifs. This world is water-themed, which I'm kinda confused about. I can't think of any particular relation between water and the Garamond font or the era from which it originated, but whatever, at least it's unique and it doesn't feel inappropriate per se. The level has some cool references to the Renaissance, the invention of italics, and the religion-driven book burnings that took place at the time, because the people of that era were just not very cash money like that. I'd say it's a fairly pleasant feeling world, and I think the theme primarily serves as a way to transition from the previous world to the next, part pre-industrial, part natural. Speaking of which, World 3 is a Didot, one of my favorite typefaces due to it being way too clean looking for as old as it is. If Gothic depicted the late Middle Ages and Garamond repped the Renaissance, then the Didot stages perfectly embody the Enlightenment. This world is so peaceful and just outright lovely to be in. The creeping ivy and marble columns are an elegant visual counterpart to the orchestra playing in the level's background. We get some cool 3D effects with these gazebos sprinkled throughout the levels, and the collectible asterisks detail the emergence of print media, commercialized typefaces, and even the world's first encyclopedia, all things that are relatively normal in modern society. It feels so classically classy. If this world's presentation doesn't evoke the spirit of 18th century European high society, then I'm not sure what will. Next up is Clarendon, which brings us to the Wild West, where slab serifs reign supreme. I'm not a huge fan of this one. It's mostly because of the level design gimmicks, like this minecart section, which I will say, I like how writing over the letters here knocks off the serifs. It's a cool way to reference the creation of sans serif typefaces. Man, those 5 minutes in I Shot the Serif really paid off. Unfortunately, the controls for this section are a massive pain. The only way to make your minecart jump is to jump within the minecart, so you need to be able to control your balls and the cart independently even though they're bound to the same keys. Someone really didn't think that one through, huh? It goes without saying, but I will anyways. This is super wonky to control. Then we've got this section where you have to avoid being shot at, else your balls will explode. These shots aren't difficult to dodge or anything, but it's just frustrating how slow the game forces you to play in response. And then, oh joy, a section that combines the two. The minecart section may feel clunky and the target section may be annoying, but this is both. These sections take up half the world too. It's just kind of unpleasant to play through. Futura offers yet another thematic change of pace, and is a world based on the geometric simplicity and functionality introduced with the Bauhaus school, as well as the abstractionist art movements that gained popularity in this era. Such a funky level. It's the first in the game that feels completely detached from nature or anything tangible in our world, which is sort of reflective of the artistic movement it embodies. I think this is when it hit me how cool it was to see such variety from this game's worlds and environments. On its own, Futura is able to seamlessly blend numerous different movements and artistic styles into one grand level, which is kind of what the game itself does, just on a much grander scale. For example, Gothic and Futura, aside from being typographic styles, don't really seem to have much in common, yet this game is able to combine these styles and their associated artistic movements into one game, alongside various others with just as little in common, with nothing feeling particularly out of place here. It's very impressive. The level itself provides a bit more of a challenge with these unstable platforms, slightly trickier puzzles, and this one section where one ball hangs lower than the other. It only took half the game for them to come up with this. Still, nothing too tricky. Times is a snap back to reality and is so heavily themed around industry that I can hear Tolkien turning in his grave as we speak. It's so cool, this noir assembly line with its mechanical background music, then a smooth transition into the Art Deco styling and swing music of the Roaring '20s. We also get some awesome platforming challenges themed around the invention of cinema, the construction of New York City, and Thibodaux's classification system for fonts, showing off the different styles of serifs that the previous worlds featured. Feels like a newspaper come to life, and I love it, just like I love Helvetica, another one of my favorite typefaces. God, I'm such a nerd. The mandatory ice world of any platformer, Helvetica mixes an alpine landscape with 1960s Swiss aesthetics, and it rocks. This world looks outright phenomenal. A lot of the typefaces throughout the previous levels sorta looked modern, but Helvetica is the first one that truly feels modern, and its white on red environment certainly offers a strong break from levels prior. The background music here is definitely one of the game's best. Such a slick track with its chugging guitar line and up-tempo drum loop, it feels like I'm in a spy film. I wish there were more gameplay gimmicks tied into real-world events like in previous levels, is what I would say if we didn't have this awesome section dedicated to 60s counterculture. Look at that. Having such a stark transition from clean lines and natural landscapes to a psychedelic haze helps this section really hit different. The colorful background, doubled vision, floatier physics, this section even reverses the controls so that it's not just a trip to look at, but to play through as well. An awesome way to end an equally awesome stage. This world is definitely one of the game's highlights. Finally, we arrive at Pixel, where typography is propelled into the digital age. Man, they went crazy for the white here at the end, huh? This level feels tailor-made for the retro gamer in all of us, with its circuit board backdrop and callbacks to early stages of the internet and coding, as well as arcade classics like Breakout, Space Invaders, and Tetris. The Space Invaders and Tetris sections are actually somewhat tricky, and alongside this world's low-gravity platforming, Pixel actually offers slightly more of a challenge than this game's other worlds. It feels like an appropriate way to cap off the game, not just in terms of difficulty, but thematically as well. As the game itself informs you, with the advent of the digital age, fonts are more accessible to the common man than ever before, and making your own fonts has never been easier either. As we arrive back in the overworld, the blocky barrier that had blue-balled us before is promptly destroyed, revealing a showcase of all the fonts that we've explored throughout the course of the game. At this point, we've reached the official end of Typewriter. The white dot appears, it turns into the moon, naturally, and the credits roll. However, this isn't the end for us real gamers. No. Hidden at the bottom of this lake, we do have one more bonus stage, Comic Sans. A monument to early 2010s internet meme culture, this level is a strong departure from the clean professionalism and atmospheric beauty of the game's earlier stages. Let's give it a go, and shit. This stupid cat. Comic Sans is a gauntlet and totally unlike any other world in this game. One long level, no checkpoints, awkward jumps, and a giant kitten with laser eyes to ensure you maintain a constant pace and generally make your life miserable, as cats like to do. After the beautiful and laid-back nature of most of the other worlds, this is a massive spike in difficulty as the level demands nothing short of mastery of this game and its physics, especially if you're aiming for all collectibles. The ampersand is ridiculously difficult to get here. It's not hard to find, it's right there, but you have to hit this P at just the right moment with just the right speed to get it. It's unbelievably tricky. Compared to the rest of the game, this level is straight up frustrating to complete, but in the end, I did it. And that's Typewriter, all in all, a pretty short game. I was taking my time with this one too, but I still managed to beat it in a little under 3 hours, and I think that highlights my biggest problem with it. This game isn't long at all, nor does it have much of a challenge to offer. We do get a lot of cool historical references within the level design, but few of them offer much of an increase in difficulty, with a couple bordering on being annoying. Only a handful of obstacles are designed specifically to confront the atypical design of the protagonist, but the game doesn't really go all the way. Looking at it purely from a gameplay perspective, Typewriter surprisingly doesn't bring much to the table that's particularly new or creative. I can't say it's all that replayable either. I mean, once you've earned all achievements, which takes another, 30 minutes? That's pretty much it. There's not much of a reason to come back to it unless you're just itching to delete your save data. It's not even that well made. I encountered more than a few bugs during my playthrough. But above all else, I think being on mobile is definitely what hurts this game the most. I mean, with such simplistic controls, it's obvious that this game was made primarily with smartphones in mind. Playing it on anything else just highlights how basic it is from a design standpoint. However, given its length and price tag, it fails at being the two things people want from mobile games: infinitely replayable and free. It doesn't matter if the game looks generic or has the stupidest advertising campaign you've ever seen. As long as it fulfills those two criteria, it's still going to do massive numbers because fuck you, it's Homescapes. No wonder it was so difficult for them to get the word out on this game. How are you supposed to advertise it when it's exactly the opposite of what your target audience wants? With that in mind, is it really justifiable to spend $3.50 on this game? Is it at all reasonable to waste money on a painfully short experience for a platform that's flooded with competitors offering free entertainment for weeks? Could that, in any way, be considered a good deal? Oh, hell yeah! It's probably not much of a surprise considering how much I've already gushed about it, but for those with a short attention span, allow me to make this abundantly clear. I completely adore Typewriter. It may not be the best game per se, but as an artistic experience, $3 is an absolute steal for this thing. In terms of presentation alone, this is easily one of the most beautiful games I've played in a long time, and as a mobile game, it's truly in a league of its own. Nothing comes even remotely close. It may not be terribly long, but it's driven by a singular focus. It's a game wholly dedicated to showing off the beauty and history of one of the most underappreciated art forms out there. It's a short but concentrated experience. It knows what it wants to be and doesn't try to be anything that it's not. The gameplay isn't complex, but it's not supposed to be, because every second you spend focused on the gameplay is 1 second taken away from admiring the backgrounds, the music, the lighting, the history, the effects, and the fonts themselves. The developers wanted to prove the significance and beauty of the seemingly mundane, so they themselves crafted an interactive work of art in honor of their subject, which, I would argue, accomplishes that goal with flying colors. It is undeniably one of the coolest games I've ever played. It's gorgeous both visually and sonically, it's well researched, it's accessible to all, plus, it's the only platformer I know of where you control a pair of balls. I mean, the jokes practically write themselves. As I was writing this script, the YouTuber Noodle uploaded a video sharing his thoughts on the Baldur's Gate discourse, which you should definitely watch, by the way. His argument is primarily the same as Nelson, the game dev who started the discourse after he was horribly misunderstood and mistreated as a result. They state that, as cool as it is to see games as mind-bogglingly massive in scale as Baldur's Gate, that level of scale unfortunately cannot be the industry standard, simply because smaller studios that don't have the resources will run themselves into the ground trying to create something that they simply don't have the time or money for, which is nearly what happened to Larian Studios while they were making Baldur's Gate.
It's those smaller, more focused experiences that give the game industry variety, that keep things interesting for us gamers, and I'll be damned if Typewriter isn't indicative of that.
I've never played anything like it. There's certainly no other mobile game this artistically distinct, and it's definitely a refreshing change of pace from the garbage you usually see heaped onto these platforms. It's exactly what I wanted out of a game about typography, and hopefully it serves as a reminder to all to try new things and keep your gaming experiences interesting. I guess what I'm trying to say is that you best not let me catch you out here playing Homescapes.